again, dreamers. It's that time of night where we come together to listen to the stories of Dreamland. Tonight's story is for those who have the desire to explore the extraordinary as we continue our theme of urban exploration. As always, you could leave a suggestion for future themes in the comments below. Thank you. Enjoy. Luca was a collector of secrets, the kind hidden in the cracks of decrepit buildings, whispered by the wind through shattered windows, and scrawled in the graffiti of forgotten places. Urban exploration wasn't just a hobby for him. It was his lifeblood. From the crypt-like silence of an old factory to the eerie stillness of a crumbling mansion, Luca lived for the thrill of walking where no one dared. He had just returned to Berlin after a particularly hair-raising exploration of an abandoned sanatorium in the Bavarian Alps. His boots were still caked with mud, and his camera held haunting snapshots of rotting operating tables and unhinged doors. Luca was decompressing at one of his usual haunts, De Keller, a grimy underground bar where industrial techno and cigarette smoke mingled in the air like ghosts. That was when he met Emile. Emile was, at first glance, unremarkable. Mid-30s, lanky, with darting eyes that never seemed to settle. He spoke with a hurried cadence, like someone with too many thoughts and not enough time to say them all. Luca might have brushed him off entirely, if it weren't for the way he leaned in and spoke his next words.
You're into exploring, right? Urban stuff?
Luca raised an eyebrow.
You could say that.
Emile smirked, a twitchy grin that didn't quite reach his eyes.
You ever heard of the old Rotbach jail?
No, Luca replied, intrigued despite himself. He took a sip of his beer, the bitterness grounding him as Emile continued.
It's not on any map,
Emile said as his voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper.
My cousin's friend found it by accident while hiking. Said it was different, creepier than most places. It's been locked up for decades, but the gates are broken now.
Luca tilted his head. And why haven't you explored it? Emile hesitated, his gaze flickering to the bar's shadowy corners.
Not my thing, he muttered. But I thought of you. Figured you'd appreciate it.
There was something about Emile's demeanor that didn't sit right. But Luca had heard stranger tales in places like this. The curiosity gnawed at him.
Where is it?
Luca asked.
North of Eberswalde, middle of nowhere. I could show you the spot on a map.
Emile scribbled crude drawings on a napkin, the ink smearing slightly as his hand shook.
It's a bit of a hike from the nearest road, but it's worth it. You'll see.
3 days later, Luca stood at the edge of a dense forest, the mid-October wind biting through his jacket. Beside him was Jonas, a fellow urban explorer he trusted implicitly. Luca had told Jonas about the trip, and while Jonas was skeptical, the allure of an untouched site was irresistible.
You sure Emile's cousin's friend isn't full of shit?
Jonas asked as they trudged down the overgrown trail.
I guess we'll find out,
Luca said, adjusting his backpack. The weight of his gear was a familiar comfort, grounding him as they entered the shadowy woods. The hike was grueling, the path almost non-existent. The forest seemed alive, whispering in tones that felt more sinister the deeper they went. And then, there it was. The jail loomed before them, its facade blackened with moss and decay. A barbed wire fence, rusted and sagging, encircled the compound like a wounded serpent. The gate hung open, one hinge groaning faintly in the wind.
Holy shit!
Jonas muttered, pulling out his camera. Luca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Something about that place felt wrong. They stepped inside. The interior was worse than Luca had imagined. The corridors were labyrinthian, the air thick with mildew and something else, something metallic, like blood. Cells lined the walls, their iron bars crusted with rust. Faded graffiti marred the walls, some of it nonsensical, some of it disturbingly coherent. They watch. Do not sleep. He is still here.
It feels like we're not supposed to be here,
Jonas said, his voice unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence.
That's the point,
Lucas said, forcing a grin. As they ventured deeper, the light from their flashlights seemed to dim, swallowed by the darkness. Jonas took the lead, snapping photos while Luca examined the cells. Many were empty, but others held the detritus of lives abandoned. A broken doll, a pair of rotting boots, a notebook with its pages stuck together.
Whoa, check this out!
Jonas called from down the hall. Luca followed the sound of his voice, rounding a corner to find Jonas standing in front of a cell. The door was ajar, the inside littered with old chains and what looked like animal bones.
This place is insane,
Jonas said, stepping inside. And that's when the cell door slammed shut. Lucas spun around just in time to see Emil stepping out of the shadows, his face twisted into a grin that was equal parts triumph and madness.
Welcome home, Luca,
Emil said. Luca's heart sank. Emil wasn't supposed to be here. And then it hit him. Emil's weird demeanor, his weird way of speaking, and his place that no one knew about. Emil had led him here.
What the hell is this?
Luca demanded, his voice trembling. Emil didn't answer. He only laughed, a low, guttural sound that echoed down the empty halls. The lights flickered, the air grew colder, and then Luca heard it, the sound of another cell door creaking open, deeper in the darkness. The sound of the creaking cell door echoed like a scream down the stone corridor. Luca froze, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Jonas was clawing at the bars of the cell, his face pale and panicked.
Luca, get me out of here, man!
Jonas shouted, yanking on the door with all his strength. Luca turned to Emil, who just stood there beyond the reach of the flashlight's beam. The smirk on his face was unnervingly calm, as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times.
What's going on?
Luca demanded, his voice cracking. Emil tilted his head, his grin growing wider.
Do you ever think what it means to be forgotten, Luca? To disappear? And no one cares enough to look?
You're insane, Luca said, taking a step back.
Am I?
Emil gestured around them.
This place is perfect, isn't it? No one comes here. No one dares.
He took a step closer, his movements predatory.
It's where things get left behind. People, too.
Why us? Luca's voice was shaking now, but he kept his flashlight trained on Emil.
Not us,
Emil said softly.
You.
Before Luca could react, Emil lunged. The flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam spinning wildly as Luca and Emil grappled. Luca's heart pounded as he tried to shove Emil off, but Emil's wiry frame masked a surprising strength.
Run, Luca!
Jonas shouted, but the words barely reached his ears before Emil smashed his head against the sill bars. Stars exploded in Luca's vision, and he collapsed to the ground. When he came to, the first thing he noticed was the cold. The second was the silence. Luca's hands were bound with zip ties, the plastic biting into his wrists. He was inside one of the cells now, its heavy door locked tight. Jonas was gone. The only sound was the faint drip of water somewhere far off. Emil stood right outside the bars, staring at him with a serene expression, like a zookeeper observing a caged animal.
Oh, what the hell is this?
Luca rasped, his throat dry. Emil crouched, resting his arms on his knees.
You always liked abandoned places, didn't you? Thought they were exciting, mysterious, but you never stopped to think about why they were abandoned, did you?
Where's Jonas? Luca demanded, his voice rising. Emil chuckled, a low, mirthless sound.
He's elsewhere. Don't worry about him.
Luca's stomach twisted. He pulled at the zip ties, the plastic cutting deeper into his skin.
You're sick.
Luca spat.
Maybe.
Emil leaned closer, his face inches from the bars.
Or maybe I've just accepted what this world is. People like you, always searching for something. You don't even know what it is, do you? But you'll never find it. Not out here.
He gestured vaguely toward the distant entrance.
It's here, where the silence screams, where you can hear yourself think, until you can't anymore.
You won't get away with this, Luca said. But even as the words left his mouth, they felt hollow. Emil's grin widened.
I already have.
Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time lost meaning in the stifling darkness of the cell. Emil came and went, always silent, always watching. He left Luca just enough food and water to keep him alive, but never enough to feel full. The isolation gnawed at Luca's sanity, the oppressive silence broken only by Emil's infrequent cryptic remarks.
You're starting to hear it, aren't you?
Emil said one day, his voice echoing through the corridor.
The whispers, the walls here. They remember.
At first, Luca thought it was his mind playing tricks on him. A soft rustling like leaves in the wind. Faint whispers too quiet to make out. But as the days dragged on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent.
Don't let him in. You're one of us now. He always wins.
Luca pressed his hands to his ears, but it was no use. The voices weren't coming from outside. They were inside him, writhing like worms in his brain.
Shut up,
he screamed, his voice breaking.
Shut up, shut up, shut up.
Emil's laughter echoed down the corridor, cold and empty. One night, Luca awoke to find the cell door open. The zip ties on his wrists were gone, the marks they had left behind, raw and stinging. He staggered to his feet, his legs atrophied, trembling from disuse. The hallway stretched before him, lit only by the faint glow of moonlight filtering through a cracked window. "Jonas!" Luca called out, his voice barely a whisper. No answer. He moved cautiously, every step an effort. The whispers grew louder as he walked, filling his head with a cacophony of voices. "Run, stay, it's too late." And then he saw it. At the end of the corridor stood Emil, his face hidden in shadow.
You think you're free?
Emil said, his voice soft but cutting.
You'll never leave this place, Luca. Even if you walk out, it'll follow you. You belong here now.
"No," Luca said, shaking his head. "You're wrong." But deep down, he wasn't so sure. As he stumbled past Emil, the man made no move to stop him. The laughter followed Luca out into the forest, the sound twisting into something that wasn't entirely human. When Luca finally reached civilization, days later, he was gaunt and hollow-eyed. The whispers had followed him, clinging to the edges of his thoughts like cobwebs. Emil was right. He would never leave that place. Not really.